Hello. We're going on the book. So I've set up in my kitchen because that's where my table is, and I know how much you love doing this in the dark. So I've actually got a light in here, so I'm sort of blinding myself with the light, and I've even got water because I sound like a man. So I'm good to go. Thank you, IKEA, for your lovely glasses. So let's do this. So this is the next part of 5 People You Meet in Heaven. Okay. Today is Eddie's birthday. It is the 1920s, a crowded hospital in one of the poorest sections of the city. Eddie's father smokes cigarettes in the waiting room, where the other fathers are also smoking cigarettes. The nurse enters with a clipboard. She calls his name. She mispronounces it. The other men blow smoke. Well? He raises his hand. Congratulations, the nurse says. He follows her down the hallway to the newborn's nursery. His shoes clap on the floor. Wait here, she says. Through the glass, he sees her check the numbers on the wooden cribs. She moves past one, not his. Another, not his. Another, not his. Another, not his. She stops, and there, beneath the blankets, a tiny head covered in a blue cap. She checks her clipboard again, then points. The father breathes heavily, nods his head. For a moment, his face seems to crumble, like a bridge collapsing into a river. And then he smiles. His. The journey. Eddie saw nothing of his final moment on earth, nothing of the pier or the crowd or the shattered fiberglass cart. In the stories about life after death, the soul often floats along the goodbye moment, hovering over police cars at highway accidents, or clinging like a spider to the hospital room ceilings. These are people who receive a second chance, who somehow for some reason resume their place in the world. Eddie, it appears, was not getting a second chance. Where? 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 The sky was a misty pumpkin shade, then a deep turquoise, then a bright lime. Eddie was floating and his arms were still extended. Where? The tower cart was falling. He remembered that. The little girl, Amy, she was crying. He remembered that. He remembered lunging. He remembered hitting the platform. He felt 2 small hands in his. Then what? Did I save her? Eddie could only picture it at a distance, as if it happened years ago. Stranger still, he could not feel any emotions that went with it. He could only feel calm, like a child in the cradle of his mother's arms. Where? The sky around him changed again to grapefruit yellow, then a forest green, then a pink that Eddie momentarily associated with, of all things, cotton candy. Did I save her? Did she live? Where is my worry? Where is my pain? That was it. That was what was missing. Every hurt he'd ever suffered, every ache he'd ever endured. It was all gone as an expired breath. He could not feel agony. He could not feel sadness. His consciousness felt smoky, wisp-like, incapable of anything but calm. Below him now, the colours changed again. Something was swirling. Water. An ocean. He was floating over a vast yellow sea. Now it turned melon. Now it was sapphire. Now he began to drop, hurtling towards the surface. It was faster than anything he'd ever imagined, yet there wasn't as much as a breeze on his face. And he felt no fear, until he saw the sands of a golden shore. Then he was underwater. Then everything was silent. Where is my worry? Where is my pain? Today is Eddie's birthday. He's 5 years old. It is a Sunday afternoon at Ruby Pier. Picnic tables are set among the boardwalk, which overlooks the long white beach. There is a vanilla cake with blue wax candles. There's a bowl of orange juice. The pier workers are milling about the barkers, the sideshow sideshow acts, the animal trainers, some men from the fishery. Eddie's father is as usual in a card game. Eddie plays at his feet. His older brother Joe is doing push-ups in front of a group of elderly women who feign interest and clap politely. Eddie is wearing his birthday gift, a red cowboy hat and a toy holster. He gets up and runs from one group to the next, pulling out the toy gun and going bang, bang. Come here, boy, Mickey Shea beckons from a bench. Bang, bang, goes Eddie. Mickey Shea works with Eddie's dad, fixing the rides. He's fat and wears suspenders and is always singing Irish songs to Eddie. He smells funny. He smells like cough medicine. Come here, let me do your birthday bumps, he said, like we do in Ireland. Suddenly Mickey's large hands are under Eddie's armpits. He's hoisted up and flipped over and dangled by the feet. Eddie's hat falls off. Careful, Mickey, Eddie's mother yells. Eddie's father looks up, smirks, and returns to his card game. Ho ho, I've got him, Mickey says. Now one birthday bump for every year. Mickey lowers Eddie gently until his head brushes the floor. 1. Mickey lifts Eddie back up. The others join in laughing. They yell, 2, 3. Upside down, Eddie's not sure of who he is. His head's getting heavy. He feels weird. 4, they shout. 5. Eddie is flipped the right way up and put down. Everybody claps. Eddie reaches for his hat and then stumbles over and falls down. He gets up, wobbles over to Mickey Shea and punches him on the arm. Haw, haw, what was that for, little man? Mickey says. Everyone laughs. Eddie turns and runs away 3 steps before being swept into his mother's arms. Are you all right, my darling birthday boy? She's only inches from his face. He sees her deep red lipstick and her plump, soft cheeks and the wave of her auburn hair. I was upside down, he tells her. I saw, she said. She puts his hat back on his head. Later she'll walk him along the pier, perhaps take him on an elephant ride, or watch the fishermen pull in their evening catch, the fish flipping like shiny red coins. She'll hold his hand and tell him God is proud of him for being a good boy on his birthday, and that will make the world feel right side up again. The arrival. Eddie awoke in a teacup. It was part of some amusement park ride, a large teacup made of dark polished wood with a cushioned seat and a steel hinged door. Eddie's arms and legs dangled over the edges. The sky continued to change colours from a shoe leather brown to a deep scarlet. His instinct was to reach for his cane. He'd kept it by his bed for the last few years because there were mornings he no longer had the strength to actually get up without it there. This really embarrassed Eddie. He used to punch men in the shoulders when he greeted them. But now there was no cane, so Eddie exhaled and tried to pull himself up. Surprisingly, his back did not hurt. His leg didn't throb. Nothing hurt. He yanked harder and hoisted himself easily over the edge of the teacup, landing awkwardly on the ground, where he was struck by 3 quick thoughts. First, he felt wonderful. Second, he was all alone. Third, he was still on Ruby Pier. But it was a different Ruby Pier now. There were canvas tents and vacant grassy sections and so few obstructions that you could see the mossy breakwater out in the ocean. The colours of the attractions were firehouse reds and creamy whites, no teals or maroons, and each ride had its own wooden ticket booth. The teacup he'd awoken in was part of a primitive attraction called a spinorama. Its sign was made of plywood, and there were other low-slung signs hinged on storefronts that lined the promenade. El Tiempo cigars, now that's a smoke. Chowder, 10 cents. Ride the Whipper, the sensation of the age. Eddie blinked hard. This was the Ruby Pier of his childhood, some 75 years ago. Only everything was new, freshly scrubbed. Over there was the Loop-the-Loop ride, which had been torn down decades ago. Over there were the bathhouses and the saltwater swimming pools that had been raised in the 1950s. Over there, jutting into the sky, was the original Ferris wheel in its pristine white paint, and beyond that, the streets of his old neighbourhood and the rooftops of the crowded brick tenements with laundry lines hanging out the windows. Eddie tried to yell, but his voice was raspy air. He mouthed a "hey," but nothing came out of his throat. He grabbed at his arms and legs. Aside from his lack of voice, he felt incredible. He walked in a circle. He jumped. No pain. In the last 10 years, he'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without wincing, or to sit without struggling, or to find comfort in his lower back. On the outside, he looked the same as he had in the morning. A squat, barrel-chested old man in a cap and shorts and a brown maintenance jersey. But he was limber. So limber, in fact, he could touch behind his ankles and raise a leg to his belly. He explored his body like an infant, fascinated by the new mechanics. A rubber man doing a rubber man stretch. Then he ran. Ha, running. Eddie had not truly run in more than 60 years, not since the war. But he was running now, starting with a few gingerly steps, then accelerating into a full gait, faster, like the running boy of his youth. He ran along the boardwalk, past a bait and tackle stand for fishermen, 5 cents, and a bathing suit rental for swimmers, 3 cents. He ran past a chute ride called the Dipsy Doodle. He ran along the Ruby Pier Promenade, beneath magnificent buildings of Moorish design, with spires and minarets and onion-shaped domes. He ran past the Parisian Carousel, with its carved wooden horses, glass mirrors and Wurlitzer organ, all shiny and new. Only an hour ago it seemed he'd been scraping rust from pieces of that in his shop. He ran down the heart of the old Midway, where the weight guessers, fortune tellers and dancing gypsies had once worked. He lowered his chin and held his arms out like a glider, and every few steps he would jump the way children do, hoping running will soon turn to flying. It might have seemed ridiculous to anyone watching, this white-haired maintenance worker all alone, making like an aeroplane. But the running boy inside every man is in every man, no matter how old he gets. And then Eddie stopped running. He heard something, a voice, tinny, as if coming through a megaphone. How about him, ladies and gentlemen? Have you ever seen such a horrible sight? Eddie was standing by an empty ticket kiosk in front of a large theatre. The sign above read, "The world's most curious citizens, Ruby Pier's sideshow." Holy smoke, they're fat, they're skinny. See the wild man, the sideshow, the freak house, the ballyhoo hall. Eddie recalled them shutting this down at least 50 years ago, about the time television became popular and people didn't need sideshows to tickle their imagination. Look well upon this savage, born into a most peculiar handicap. Eddie peered into the entrance. He'd encountered some odd people here. There was Jolly Jane, who weighed over 500 pounds and needed 2 men to push her up the stairs. There were the co-joined twin sisters who shared a spine and played musical instruments. There were the men who swallowed swords, women with beards, and a pair of Indian brothers whose skin went rubbery from being stretched and soaked in oil until it hung in bunches from their limbs. Eddie, as a child, had felt really sorry for the sideshow cast. They were forced to sit in booths or on stages, sometimes behind bars, as patrons walked past them, leering and pointing. A barker would ballyhoo the oddity, and it was a barker's voice that Eddie heard now. Only a terrible twist of fate could leave a man in such a pitiful condition. From the furthest corners of the world, we have brought him for your examination. Eddie entered the darkened hall. The voice grew louder. The tragic soul has endured a perversion of nature. It was coming from the other side of the stage. Only here at the world's most curious citizens can you draw the near. Eddie pulled aside the curtain. Feast your eyes among the most unusual. The barker's voice vanished, and Eddie stepped back in disbelief. There, sitting in a chair, alone on the stage, was a middle-aged man with narrow stooped shoulders, naked from the waist up. His belly sagged over his belt. His hair was closely cropped. His lips were thin and his face was long and drawn. Eddie would have long since forgotten him, if not for one distinctive feature. His skin was blue. "Hello, Edward," he said. "I have been waiting for you." This chapter's called The First Person Eddie Meets in Heaven. "Don't be afraid," the blue man said, rising slowly from his chair. "Don't be afraid." His voice was soothing, but Eddie could only stare. He'd barely even known this man. Why was he seeing him now? It was like one of those faces that pops into your dreams and the next morning you say, you never guess who I dreamed about last night. "Your body feels like a child, right?" Eddie just nodded. "You were a child when you knew me, that's why. You start with the same feelings that you had then." "Start what?" Eddie thought. The blue man lifted his chin. His skin was a grotesque shade, a greying blueberry. His fingers were wrinkled. He walked outside. Eddie followed. The pier was empty. The beach was empty. Was the entire planet empty as well? "Tell me something," the blue man said. He pointed to a two-humped wooden roller coaster in the distance. The Whipper. It was built in the 1920s, before under-friction wheels, meaning the cars couldn't turn very quickly unless you wanted them launching off the track. The Whipper. Is it still the fastest ride on Earth? Eddie looked at that old clanking thing which had been torn down years and years ago, and he shook his head. "Ah," the blue man said. "I imagined as much. Things don't change here, and there's none of that peering down from the clouds, I'm afraid." "Here?" Eddie thought. The blue man smiled, as if he'd heard Eddie actually asking the question. He touched Eddie's shoulder and Eddie felt a surge of warmth, unlike anything he'd ever felt before. His thoughts came spilling out like sentences. "How did I die?" "An accident," the blue man said. "How long have I been dead?" "A minute? An hour? 1,000 years." "Where am I?" The blue man pursed his lips and repeated the question thoughtfully. "Where are you?" He turned and raised his arms. All at once the rides at the old Ruby Pier cranked up to life. The Ferris wheel spun, the Dodgem cars smacked into each other, the Whipper clacked uphill, and the Parisian carousel horses bobbed on their brass poles to the cheery music of the Wurlitzer organ. The ocean was in front of them. The sky was the colour of lemons. "Where do you think?" the blue man said. "Heaven." "No." Eddie shook his head violently. "No, no." The blue man seemed amused. "No, it can't be heaven. It can't be heaven." "No," said the blue man. "Why can't it be heaven?" "Why?" "Because this is where you grew up?" Eddie mouthed the word. "Yes." "Ah," the blue man nodded. "Well, people often belittle the place where they were born, but heaven can be found in the most unlikely corners, and heaven itself has many steps. This for me is the second, and for you, Eddie, it's the first." He led Eddie through the park, passing cigar shops and sausage stands and flat joints where suckers lost their nickels and dimes. Heaven, Eddie thought? Ridiculous. He'd spent most of his adult life trying to get away from Ruby Pier. It was an amusement park, that's all, a place to scream and get wet and trade your dollars for Kewpie dolls. The thought that this was some kind of blessed resting place was beyond his imagination. He again tried to speak, but this time he heard a small grunt from his chest. "Ugh." The blue man turned. "Your voice will come. We all go through the same thing. You cannot talk when you first arrive." He smiled. "It helps you listen." "There are 5 people you meet in heaven," the blue man suddenly said. "Each of us was in your life for a reason. You may not have known the reason at the time, and that is what heaven is for understanding your life on earth." Eddie looked confused. People think of heaven as a paradise garden, a place where they can float on clouds and laze in rivers and mountains, but scenery without solace is meaningless. This is the greatest gift God can give you to understand what happened in your life, to have it explained. It's the peace that you've always been searching for. Eddie coughed, trying to bring up his voice. He was tired of being silent. I am your first person, Edward. When I died, my life was illuminated by 5 others, and then I came here to wait for you, to stand in your line, to tell you my story, which becomes part of yours. There will be others for you too. Some you knew, maybe some you didn't, but they all crossed your path before they died, and they altered it forever. Eddie pushed a sound up from his chest as hard as he could. "What?" he finally croaked. His voice seemed to be breaking through a shell like a baby chick. "What killed?" The blue man waited patiently. "What killed you?" The blue man looked a bit surprised. He smiled at Eddie. "You did," he said. Today is Eddie's birthday. He's 7 years old and his gift is a new baseball. He squeezes it in each hand, feeling a surge of power that runs up his arms. He imagines he's one of his heroes on the Crackerjack collector cards, maybe the great pitcher Walter Johnson. "Here, toss it," his brother Joe said. They're running down the midway past the game booth, where if you knock over 3 green bottles, you win a coconut and a straw. "Come on, Eddie," Joe said. "Share." Eddie stops and imagines himself in a stadium. He throws the ball, his brother pulls in his elbow and ducks. "Too hard," Joe yells. "My ball," Eddie screams. "Dang you, Joe." Eddie watches it thump down the boardwalk and bang off a post into a small clearing behind the sideshow tents. He runs after it and Joe follows. They drop to the ground. "You see it?" Eddie said. "Nah." A whumping noise interrupts them. A tent flap opens. Eddie and Joe look up. There's a grossly fat woman and a shirtless man with reddish hair covering his entire body. Freaks from the circus show. The children freak. "What are you wiseacres doing back here?" the hairy man said. "You looking for trouble?" Joe's lip trembles and he starts to cry. He jumps up and runs away, his arms pumping wildly. Eddie rises too, but then sees his ball against a sawhorse. He eyes the shirtless man and moves slowly towards it. "This is mine," he mumbles. He scoops the ball up and runs after his brother. "Listen, mister," Eddie rasped. "I never killed you, okay? I don't even know you." The blue man sat on a bench. He smiled as if trying to put a guest at ease. Eddie remained standing, a defensive posture. "Let me begin with my real name," the blue man said. "I was christened Joseph Kowalczyk, the son of a tailor in a small Polish village. We came to America in 1894. I was only a boy. My mother held me over the railing of the ship, and this became my earliest childhood memory. My mother swinging me in the breezes of the new world. Like most immigrants, we had no money. We slept on a mattress in my uncle's kitchen. My father was forced to take a job in a sweatshop, sewing buttons on coats. When he was 10, he took me from school and I joined him." Eddie watched as the blue man's pitted face and thin lips and his sagging chest moved. "Why is he telling me this?" he thought. "I was a nervous child by nature, and the noise in the shop only made things worse. I was too young to be there amongst all those men sweating and complaining. Whenever the foreman came near, my father told me, 'Look down, don't make him notice you.' Once, however, I stumbled and dropped a sack of buttons, which spilled over the floor. The foreman screamed that I was worthless, a worthless child, and that I must go. I can still see that moment, my father pleading with him like a street beggar, the foreman sneering, wiping his nose on the back of his hand. I felt my stomach twist in pain, and then I felt something wet on my leg. I looked down. The foreman looked at my soiled pants and laughed, and the other workers laughed at me too. After that, my father refused to speak to me. He felt I had shamed him, and I suppose in his world I had. But fathers can ruin their sons, and I was, in a fashion, ruined after that. I was a nervous child, and when I grew, I was a nervous young man. Worst of all, at night, I still wet the bed. In the morning, I would sneak the soiled sheets to the wash basin and soak them. One morning, I looked up to see my father. He saw the dirty sheets and glared at me with eyes that I will never forget, as if he wished he could snap the cord of life between us. The blue man paused, his skin, which seemed to be soaked in blue fluid, folded in small fatty layers around his belt. Edward couldn't stop staring. "I was not always a freak, Edward," he said, "but back then medicine was rather primitive. I went to a chemist seeking something for my nerves. He gave me a bottle of silver nitrate, told me to mix it with some water and take it every night. Silver nitrate, it was later considered poison, but it was all I had. And when it failed to work, I could only assume I wasn't ingesting enough, so I took more. I swallowed 2 gulps and sometimes 3, and with no water. Soon people were looking at me strangely. My skin was turning the colour of ash. I was ashamed and agitated. I swallowed even more silver nitrate until my skin went from grey to blue, a side effect of the poison." The blue man paused. His voice dropped. "The factory dismissed me. The foreman said I scared the other workers. Without work, how would I eat? Where would I live? I found a saloon, a dark place where I could hide beneath a hat and a coat. One night a group of carnival men were in the back. They smoked cigars. They laughed. One of them, a rather small fellow with a wooden leg, kept looking at me. Finally, he approached. By the end of the night, I'd agreed to join their carnival and my life as a commodity had begun." Eddie noticed the resigned look on the blue man's face. He'd often wondered where the sideshow cast had come from. He assumed there was a sad story behind each and every one of them. "The carnivals gave me my names, Edward. Sometimes I was the blue man of the North Pole, or the blue man of Algeria, or the blue man of New Zealand. I'd never been to any of these places, of course, but it was pleasant to be considered exotic, if only on a painted sign. The show was simple. I would sit on a stage, half undressed, and as people walked past, and the barker told them how pathetic I was. For this, I was able to put a few coins in my pocket. The manager once called me the best freak in his stable, and as sad as it sounds, I took a certain amount of pride in that. When you're an outcast, even a tossed stone can be cherished." One winter I came to this pier, Ruby Pier. They were starting a sideshow called the Curious Citizens. I liked the idea of being in one place, escaping the bumpy horse carts of carnival life. This became my home. I lived in a room above a sausage shop. I played cards at night with the other sideshow workers, with the tinsmiths, sometimes even with your father. In the early mornings, if I wore long shirts and draped my head in a towel, I could even walk along this beach without scaring people. It may not sound like much, but for someone like me, it was a freedom that I had very rarely known before. He stopped and looked at Eddie. "Do you understand why we're here? Why we're here now? We're not in your heaven. We're in mine." Take one story, viewed from 2 different angles. One rainy Sunday morning in July in the late 1920s, when Eddie and his friends are tossing a baseball Eddie got for his birthday nearly a year ago. Take a moment when that ball flies over Eddie's head and out into the street. Eddie, wearing tawny pants and a wool cap, chases after it and runs in front of an automobile, a Ford Model A. The car screeches, veers, and just misses him. He shivers, exhales, gets the ball, and races back to his friends. The game soon ends and the children run to the arcade to play the eerie digger machine with its claw-like mechanism that picks up tiny small toys. Now take that same story from a different angle. A man is behind the wheel of the Ford Model A, which he has borrowed from a friend to practice his driving. The road is wet from the morning rain. Suddenly a baseball bounces across the street and a small boy comes racing after it. The driver slams on the brakes and yanks the wheel. The car skids and the tyres screech. The man somehow regains control, but the Model A rolls on. The child has disappeared in the rearview mirror. but the man's body is still affected, thinking about how close he came to tragedy. The jolt of adrenaline has forced his heart to pump furiously, and this heart is not a strong one, and the pumping leaves him drained. The man feels dizzy and his head drops momentarily. His automobile nearly collides with another. The second driver honks, the man veers again, spinning the wheel, pushing on the brake pedal. He skids along the avenue and then turns down an alley. His vehicle rolls until it collides with the rear of a parked truck. There's a small crashing noise. The headlights shatter. The impact smacks the man into the steering wheel. His forehead bleeds. He steps from the Model A, sees the damage, and collapses onto the wet pavement. His arm throbs. His chest hurts. It's a Sunday morning, but the alley is empty. He remains there unnoticed, slumped against the side of the car. The blood from his coronary arteries no longer flows to his chest. An hour later, a policeman finds him. A medical examiner pronounces him dead. The cause of death is listed as heart attack. There are no known relatives. Take one story viewed from two different angles. It's the same day, the same moment. One angle ends happily in an arcade, playing games, with a little boy in tawny pants dropping pennies into the airy digger machine. The other ends quite badly in a city morgue, where one worker calls another worker over to marvel at the blue skin of the newest arrival. "You see," Blue Man whispered, having finished the story from his point of view. "Little boy." Eric feels a shiver. "Oh no," he whispers. Today is Eddie's birthday. He's 8 years old. He sits on the edge of a plaid couch, his arms crossed in anger. His mother is at his feet, tying his shoes. His father is at the mirror, fixing his tie. "I don't want to go," said Eddie. "I know," his mother said, not looking up, "but we have to. Sometimes you have to do things when sad things happen." "But it's my birthday." Eddie looks mournfully across the room at the erector set in the corner, a pile of toy metal girders and small rubber wheels. Eddie had been making a truck. He's good at putting things together. He'd hoped to show it to his friends at a birthday party. Instead, they have to go somewhere and get all dressed up, and it isn't fair, he thinks. His brother Joe, dressed in wool pants and a bow tie, enters with a baseball glove on his left hand. He slaps it hard. He makes a face at Eddie. "Those were my old shoes," Joe said. "My new ones are better." Eddie winces. He hates having to wear Joe's old things. "Stop wiggling," his mother says. "It hurts," Eddie whines. "Enough," his father yells. He glares at Eddie. Eddie goes silent. At the cemetery, Eddie barely recognises the pier people. The men who normally wear gold lame and red turbans are now in black suits like his father. The women seem to be wearing the same black dress. Some cover their faces with veils. Eddie watches a man shovel dirt into a hole. The man says something about ashes. Eddie holds his mother's hand and squints at the sun. He's supposed to be sad, he knows, but he's secretly counting numbers, starting from 1, hoping that by the time he reaches 1,000, he will have his birthday back. The first lesson. "Please, mister," Eddie pleaded. "I didn't know. Believe me, God help me, I didn't know." The blue man nodded. "You couldn't know. You were too young." Eddie stepped back. He squared his body as if bracing for a fight. "But now I gotta pay," he said. "To pay?" "For my sin. That's why I'm here, right? Justice." The blue man smiled. "No, Edward. You are here so I can teach you something. All the people that you meet here have something to teach you." Eddie was sceptical. His fist stayed clenched. "What?" he said. "There are no random acts. We are all connected. You can no more separate one life from another than you can separate a breeze from the wind." Eddie shook his head. "We were throwing a ball. It was my stupidity running out here like this. Why should you have to die on account of me? It's not fair." The blue man held out his hand. "Fairness," he said, "doesn't govern life and death. If it did, no good person would ever die young." He rolled his palm upwards, and suddenly they were standing in a cemetery behind a small group of mourners. A priest at the gravesite was reading from a Bible. Eddie couldn't see faces, only the backs of hats and dresses and suit coats. "My funeral," the blue man said. "Look at the mourners. Some didn't even know me well, yet they came. Why? Did you ever wonder? Why do people gather when others die? Why do people feel that they should? It is because the human spirit knows deep down that all lives intersect, that death doesn't just take someone, it misses someone else. And in the small distance between being taken and being missed, lives are changed. You say that you should have died instead of me, but during my time on earth, people died instead of me too. It happens every day, when lightning strikes a minute after you're gone, or an aeroplane crashes on a flight that you might have been on, when your colleague gets ill and you don't. We think such things are random, but there's a balance to it all when you think about it. One withers, another grows. Birth and death are part of a whole. And that's why we're drawn to babies, he turned to the mourners, and to funerals. Eddie looked again at the gravesite gathering. He wondered if he'd had a funeral. He wondered if anyone had came. He saw the priest reading from the Bible and the mourners lowering their heads. This was the day the blue man had been buried, all those years ago. Eddie had been there, a little boy, fidgeting through the ceremony on his birthday, with no idea of the role that he'd played in it. "I still don't understand," Eddie whispered. "What good came from your death?" "You lived," the blue man answered. "But we barely knew each other. I might as well have been a stranger." The blue man put his arms on Eddie's shoulders. Eddie felt the warmth and the melting sensation. "Strangers," the blue man said, "are just family you've yet to come to know." With that, the blue man pulled Eddie close. Instantly, Eddie felt everything that the blue man had ever felt in his life rushing into him, swimming into his body. The loneliness, the shame, the nervousness, the heart attack. It slid into Eddie like a drawer being closed. "I'm leaving," the blue man whispered into his ear. "This step of heaven is over for me, but there are others for you to meet." "Wait," Eddie said, pulling back. "Just tell me one thing. The little girl at the pier. Did I save her?" The blue man did not answer. Eddie slumped. "Then my death was a waste, just like my life." "No life is a waste," the blue man said. "The only time we waste is the time we spend thinking that we are alone." He stepped back towards the gravesite and smiled, and as he did, his skin turned the loveliest shade of caramel smooth and unblemished. It was, Eddie thought, the most perfect skin that he'd ever seen. "Wait," Eddie yelled, but he was suddenly whisked into the air away from the cemetery, soaring above the great grey ocean. Below him, he saw the rooftops of old Ruby Pier, the spires, the turrets, the flags flapping in the breeze. And then it was gone. Sunday, 3 p.m. Back at the pier, the crowd stood silently around the wreckage of Freddie's free fall. Old women touched their throats. Mothers pulled their children away. Several burly men in tank tops slid to the front, as if this was something they should handle. But once they got there, they too only looked on, helpless. The sun baked down, sharpening the shadows, causing them to shield their eyes as they were saluting. "How bad is it?" people whispered from the back of the crowd. Dominguez burst through, his face red, his maintenance shirt drenched in sweat. He saw the carnage. "Oh, no, 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 Eddie," he moaned, grabbing his head. Security workers arrived. They pushed people back, but they too fell into impotent postures, hands on their hips, waiting for the ambulances. It was as if all of them, the mothers, the fathers, the kids, with their giant pulp soda cups, were too stunned to look and too stunned to leave. Death was at their feet. A carnival tune played over the park speakers. How bad is it? Sirens sounded. Men in uniforms arrived. Yellow tape was stretched around the area. The arcade booths pulled down their grates. The rides were closed indefinitely. Word spread across the beach of a very bad thing that had happened, and by sunset, Ruby Pier was empty. Today is Eddie's birthday. From his bedroom, even with the door closed, Eddie can smell the beefsteak that his mother's grilling with green peppers and sweet red onions, a strong woody odour that he loves. "Eddie," she yells from the kitchen, "where are you? Everybody's here." He rolls off the bed and puts away the comic book. He is 17 today, too old for such things, but he still enjoys the idea. Colourful heroes like the Phantom, fighting the bad guys, saving the world. He's given his collection to his school-age cousins from Romania, who came to America a few months earlier. Eddie's family met them at the docks, and they moved into the bedroom that Eddie shared with his brother Joe. The cousins cannot speak English, but they like comic books. Anyway, it gives Eddie an excuse to keep them around. "There's the birthday boy," his mother crows as he stumbles into the room. He wears a button-down white shirt and a blue tie, which pinches his muscular neck. A grunt of hellos and raised beer glasses come from the assembled visitors. Family, friends, peer workers. Eddie's father's playing cards in the corner, in a small cloud of cigar smoke. "Hey Ma, guess what?" Joe yells. "Eddie met a girl last night." "Ooh, did he?" Eddie feels a rush of blood. "Yeah, said he's going to marry her." "Shut your trap," Eddie says to Joe. Joe ignores him. "Yeah, he came into the room all Google-eyed and said, 'Joe, I've met the girl I'm going to marry.'" Eddie seethes. "I said, shut it." "What's her name, Eddie?" someone asks. "Does she go to church?" Eddie goes to his brother and socks him in the arm. "Ow! Eddie, I told you to shut it." Joe blurts out, "And he danced with her at the stand." Whack! "Ow! Shut up! Eddie, stop that." Even the Romanian cousins look up now, fighting they understand, as the two brothers grab each other and flail away, clearing the couch, until Eddie's father pulls out the cigar and yells, "Stop it before I slap both ears." The brothers separate, panting and glaring. Some older relatives smile. One of the aunts whisper, "He must really like this girl." Later, after the special steak has been eaten and the candles have been blown out and most of the guests have gone home, Eddie's mother turns on the radio. There's news about the war in Europe, and Eddie's father says something about lumber and copper wire being hard to get if things get worse with the war. They will make maintenance of the park close to impossible. "Such awful news," Eddie's mother said. Not at a birthday. She turns the dial until the small box offers music, an orchestra playing a swing melody, and she smiles and hums along. Then she comes over to Eddie, who's slouched in his chair, picking at the last pieces of cake. She removes her apron, folds it over a chair, and lifts Eddie by the hands. "Show me how you danced with her new friend, your new friend," she said. "Oh, Ma, come on." Eddie stands as if being led to his execution. His brother smirks, but his mother, with her pretty round face, keeps humming and stepping back and forwards until Eddie falls into a dance step with her. "Da-de-da," she sings with the melody. "When you're with me, da-da, the stars, the moon, da-da, 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 in June." They move around the living room until Eddie breaks down and laughs. He's already a head taller than his mother by a good 6 inches, and yet she twirls him with ease. So she whispers, "Do you like this girl? You like this girl, don't you?" Eddie loses a step. "It's all right, son," she said. "I'm happy for you." They spin to the table, and Eddie's mother grabs Joe and pulls him up. "Now, you two dance," she said. "With him? Ma!" But she insists and they relent, and soon Joe and Eddie are laughing and stumbling into each other. They join hands and move, swooping up and down in exaggerated circles Around and around the table they go to their mother's delight, and the clarinets lead the radio melody, and the Romanian cousins clap along with the final wisps of grilled steak as they evaporate into the party air. Do you want me to do more? I can. What time is it? Hang on. It's all right. It's not that late. Do you want me to do more? I can do more if you want. Ooh. No, that might be enough for now. I have to keep you wanting more. Anyway, I'll put this up, and hang on. I'll put this up, and you can listen to it. Yes, that's a good idea. You should see my kitchen. I've got my selfie stick, which I've never used before, on my fruit basket. I've got it wedged in with an umbrella on one side, a light on the other side, and I've got cords everywhere, so I could have a camera all the way over there and have it nice and, you know, on a gimbal. And I've got this monster light as well, so I've gone very high tech for you. Hopefully you'll appreciate it. Anyway, we're probably about just thinking, probably about a quarter of the way through this book. The next chapter's the second person that he meets in heaven. So obviously he has 5. So we're getting there. Cool. So I might just do the magic I need to do, and I'll send this to you. I hope that you're feeling better, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.